Summit. We are here now at this session on private funding. So thank you everyone for coming. My name is Le-hui. I'm from an organization called Social Ventures Hong Kong, and I'll be your moderator for today. Just a very quick background on Social Ventures Hong Kong. We used to call ourselves a venture philanthropic organization. Now we are trying to go a bit broader. We're trying to call ourselves an impact capital aggregator. So basically what we do is that we incubate social businesses, social startups. We also engage in venture philanthropic investments so that we can basically give all the tools to anyone, any kind of organization who wants to effect positive change for Hong Kong's urban social issues. So thank you all for coming today. I'm very excited today because I myself, I'm an impact investor and as well as an investee, and so private funding is really my kind of bread and butter. But today we have a panel of 3 very experienced funders, and I'm very sure that they will share a lot of insights with you. So I'll quickly introduce them. We have Nicole from Next Chapter, which is a crowdfunding platform for female entrepreneurs and women businesses. We have Philo from Asia Value Advisors, philanthropic advisory, and also Kenny from the Yeah Family Foundation and Hong Kong government SIE fund intermediary. So today, I think you'll be quite familiar with our format. We'll have presentations, a panel, and then we'll open it up for discussions. But before we start, I really want to kind of like gauge the temperature of the room. We want to know who we're talking to so that we can best, share our message, and hopefully everyone will go out today, feeling that they have learned something or that our session is useful. So can I just have a show of hands? How many of you here are from like NGOs or social enterprises and you're here just kind of figure out how you're going to get funding? Okay, good. What about any funders? Do we have any funders? Oh, great. Okay, we're going to call on you. Get ready, okay? Anyone who identifies as an impact investor? No? Okay, but well, hopefully someone will walk in. What about where you come from? Hong Kong? Operating in Hong Kong, working in Hong Kong? Okay, anyone not from Hong Kong? Okay. All right, we'll take care of you. Don't worry about that. Okay, so today what we really want to do is that, in our discussion with the panelists, we realized that it's really hard to kind of generalize private funding because every funder has their own quirks, their likes, their dislikes. And I think what we hope not to do today is to give you kind of like 10 commandments, 1 to 10, just follow this and you'll be fine, because that's not going to work. What we can do is that we want to really share our experiences and for you to use that as a reference so that when you go out yourself to meet funders, it'll be something in your mind that, oh, okay, someone did that before and it worked. Can I try it? So, and we really want it to be a learning and interactive experience. So if you have any questions or really you're stuck, you want to know more, when we have the Q&A, please throw everything out on us. And we have funders here, we have other NGOs, other social enterprise. We can all discuss and learn together. So without further ado, I'd like to invite our first speaker for today, Nicole, to share with us about Next Chapter.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Nicole Denholder from Next Chapter, and I'm quite pleased to be here to talk about crowdfunding. I know today with the terms private funding, and I feel crowdfunding does fall under that. And I think part of the reason that I was invited to speak is it's quite a new method of accessing funds, and it's growing quite quickly, and I think will become part of a lot of the ways different organisations, both NGOs, social enterprises, all forms of businesses start looking at the way they fund, validate their models. So I'm going to spend some time just talking through what is crowdfunding and then share some experiences of social enterprises that have crowdfunded with us and how it's worked for them. And I'm happy to take I think we'll do questions during the panel later, but certainly happy to share what I can. So we launched Next Chapter just under 18 months ago. Now, we do focus on female entrepreneurs for the simple purpose that our broader mission is to get more women funded through their business journey. And if you look at a lot of the statistics around funding for female entrepreneurs, it is quite low, both in loans and in venture capital and from angel investors. So our broader mission is to improve that. So I just want to share, what we're trying to achieve. And what we've started with is a rewards-based crowdfunding platform, and I'll explain what that means in a moment. And we've run nearly 18 projects, which is still quite small. We're a startup ourselves. We've raised nearly $1 million Hong Kong dollars. We've got a few more going at the moment, and we are launching across Southeast Asia, coming from January into Singapore, Australia, Thailand, probably Indonesia, kind of looking at growing our market because we feel there's a connectivity between organizations we can help. We also provide, we just launched last week, startup training for entrepreneurs, really looking at business fundamentals. Because when we were doing crowdfunding, what we found is we were doing a lot of business coaching. And so we really, through this startup course, we've teamed with startupcourse.com, and we look at, minimal viable product, how are you segmenting your market, what's your customer development process in terms of ideation, creation, all of these fundamentals that are very important in terms of getting to where you need to be. And I think, that's quite critical for social enterprises. And we've had, I think, over half of our campaigns have been social enterprises. And so we've talked a lot with them about that. And we also connect people to service providers, because I find particularly when people are starting out, they don't know where to go. And I myself had that experience, And so where do you find someone that you need a level of support from in terms of maybe marketing, video production, graphic design, things like this. We've also just about to link up with someone who does, which I thought was interesting, value impact analysis. So understanding what impact you're making in terms of your business. So why is crowdfunding becoming so popular? And a lot of it's the change in behaviours we've seen over the past 5 to 10 years, I think also with the financial crisis. A lot of it's there's an increase in self-employment. There is the growth of social media and technology alongside of that. We're seeing a trend to small businesses, more so than we've ever seen before. Although every small business wants to be a big business. Just look at Uber, Airbnb, Snapchat. So every startup's trying to grow. And for me, what I love about crowdfunding is the great equalizer. It's democratic, it's equalizing. You don't need to be rich. You don't need to know someone rich. You can actually, with a great idea, social media technology, get out there and make the most of your idea and reach your customer, because the fact is the middleman is removed in terms of crowdfunding. You're using digital media and technology to get to the person who is your ultimate customer, and I think that's fantastic. So there's 4 models of crowdfunding. So the donation model, which is similar to, I would say, traditional fundraising methods, and where I see the growth of donation model in crowdfunding broadly for an organisation that uses this model is, you get to reach more people with smaller amounts. So you might have 1 month a year, which you make crowdfunding month, which you then choose one project that you crowdfund. It's a way to enhance your fundraising effort. So I think crowdfunding can be quite useful. We've got the rewards-based model, which I'm going to talk about because that's the one that we've seen the most growth and is the more predominant model, and is certainly here in Hong Kong the one that would be, I think, most applicable at the moment for social enterprises. There's the lending model, which is kind of peer-to-peer lending, which is more so consumer lending, like in terms of mobile phone purchases, items like that. So I won't go into it very much today because I don't think it's that applicable yet in Hong Kong. I think there's a lot of opportunity. And then the equity model, which is more prevalent elsewhere in the world. New Zealand, Israel, Italy, Germany, America, the UK have the equity models. It's not really happening here yet in Hong Kong. That could change. And there's obviously the accredited model there in terms of accredited investors. But the US has brought in anyone can invest through equity crowdfunding, which is going to change the way we support innovation, I think. So that's interesting. But I'm not going to spend too much time on that because we only have, and I can talk about it more during the panel. So rewards crowdfunding is generally the business social enterprise or project presents a new idea, they're then reaching straight out to the general public, your consumer, to activate those funds, okay? And that's done heavily through digital media. And then what you're doing is if you raise enough money through your crowd, so you hit your goal, typically it's an all or nothing. So say you want to raise $10,000, you have to hit that to get the money from the website. And then in return, what you're giving is a product in return. So that's a method. So it's often now called pre-tailing or pre-ordering around for social enterprises in terms of what you're actually getting in return for your money. So why are people crowdfunding? Now, the obvious one is funding, but there's also an element with your idea for you to test the market and to actually validate your idea. And that's what we've seen happen with quite a few businesses, is that they really want to get some feedback and understand if people need this, right? Because we're all about what's the problem and the solution, right? But we do need to work out what people are willing to pay for as well. So that's where you're going through a validation cycle without putting up too much money. You're building marketing buzz, you're bringing your idea to life. You're able to do multiple funding cycles. So we're seeing organizations that are crowdfunding multiple times and really using that to build on their brand and build their audience. And you are building a fan base. So particularly if you have, and I think social enterprise, this works quite well, because you are telling your story as well as probably providing a service or selling a product. And people love to hear the story, right? And we see that that's what drives a lot of success through our campaigns, is when that there's something that people attach to. I'll just skip. So what can you crowdfund? So, typically what you're finding is people are looking at products, not ideas for companies. Okay, so you need to be a little bit further down the line. But services are possible, and we've done websites and technology-based businesses, but you have to be creative in what you're offering. So often that's a very good idea to form partnerships and cross-promote with other organizations. So that's where crowdfunding, you can leverage your community in terms of other organizations that you also want to promote. People look for something innovative, different, not easy to find. And also you're looking for something that targets a community, because you are trying to make a touch point. People that support you through crowdfunding believe in what you're doing, or are your early adopters, or have been affected by what you're saying. So you really do want to have very strong and targeted marketing. Just very quickly, how do campaigns work? I won't take you through the website, but people plan for 2 to 3 months before they launch, and then they run them. I would say somewhere like the US, they're normally 30 days. Here, I feel in Asia, they're up to 60 days because there's still a lot of awareness that needs to be made about crowdfunding. And you're very much telling your story, why you're doing this, how you're going to do it, what the money is going to be used for. I mean, legitimacy and transparency is quite important. A good video, high resolution images, and really thinking through price points. What are you pricing your product or service at is important. There are thousands of crowdfunding platforms, okay? That's just like a snapshot. Honestly, you just Google crowdfunding and there's I've just taken from images. I mean, there are so many out there. When I talk to people, they say, can we do it on multiple platforms at the same time? And I say no. The reason I recommend that is you're doing a lot of digital marketing in 30 to 60 days, and you're pushing everyone to one website URL, right? So you really want to focus your efforts. However, if you've got different audiences, like say you do want to go across maybe different parts of Asia and you want a different language, particularly I think from a language aspect or a cultural aspect, then you can do one campaign, run another one 3 months later, drive it out if you want to be driving different aspects. So what do we have in Hong Kong? So I'd say we've seen a lot of growth in the past 18 months. Fringeback has been around the longest. They do a lot more donation-based campaigns. And we launched, Sparkraiser's launched, Umadax is around. For debt and loans, there's Monexo, and there's also Money SQ. Has anyone seen the ad where they push down ICC? Yeah. Okay. Yeah. That's awesome. Okay. Yeah. I love that ad. Yeah. It's great. So they're not on here, but they're here today. So I think that's great. So you've got the peer-to-peer aspect. The equity. There have been some equity platforms that have launched and are no longer here in Hong Kong, but I suspect that will change in the next year. So I just want to share some examples very quickly. Anna by Karma is a great example of using crowdfunding to really get the word out there. So they're a social enterprise. They work with women to produce scarves in Bhutan. And it's by a lady called Quinn, who actually works full-time as a CFO at a UK-listed company, and was just really motivated in terms of working with these women out of Bhutan. So what we did in terms of crowdfunding is she wanted to do photography courses for the children involved in the community and build a level of creativity and interest, but through selling their scarves and using the profits from that to go back into the community and also, kind of get her product out there. So that was last year. And then since then, she's gone on to win the Hong Kong FedEx grant, just I think 3 months ago, and has just closed the DBS NUS Social Venture Challenge, and she won for the enterprise category. And the reason that she went on to those is that she started with making scarves and promoting that, and that's what we promoted through crowdfunding. And she was great at hustling on marketing. I mean, that's a lot of what it is. But what she's now doing is, for both the FedEx grant and the DBS NUS challenge, is she's creating an app where you do tailored orders that go, and they're just trialing it, so it's in beta mode. But she's using it to teach them English. So you can see all these images of them learning the alphabet, because you can tailor what you want written there. And so whether it's your name or it's like luggage tags and other items. And I think it's wonderful. It's increasing the skills. It's another product. It's upscaling. We were just talking earlier about not only upskilling, but how are you really staying abreast with technology as well as a social enterprise, right? You've got to be thinking broadly. So we saw that, and for her, a lot of it was a validation and marketing exercise. The funding was great, and but she had received quite large donations before from private donors, so it wasn't all of just that. Knots and Strokes is another one we did, where they work with female artisans across Asia, and what I think they're interesting because they could not get a loan in Sri Lanka, where the basis of this campaign was run, and they couldn't get a grant here in Hong Kong for them, because the problem was that she was placing orders to this organisation in Sri Lanka and they could not deliver. She'd place an order for 1,500 items and only get 500. And then she would say, what happened? They would say, we have nowhere to store our product, and it rained and it all got ruined. It's just terrible. So what she did is she went through a fundraising exercise, sold the products of this of her from Knots and Strokes, and used that to build a 3-story concrete work environment where they've got storage and they've got workspaces, and they're going to raise some more money to make it wheelchair capable. And this is where the women can go when they want to work or store their products. And so but it's also great because Knots and Strokes is a Hong Kong-based social enterprise who brings in products from quite a lot of other countries, and their goal is then to do this for their other artisans in Cambodia and other locations. We've also seen here Microforest. I'm not sure if anyone's familiar with Microforest, which works with underprivileged women. And they do a lot of corporate activity. So they use crowdfunding to test out a DIY kit and to see if there was an interest in the market for that versus going out and spending too much money in advance. They wanted to take pre-orders in, test that, and then go and put it out. Because actually it's quite an expensive product because it's all imported from Holland, it's glass, it's difficult to deliver. We've had Basics for Basics launched by Kayla Wong, and their brand actually works with Helping Hand, and she does a barter system. So if you do any volunteering with Helping Hand, she takes, you get, I think it's like tokens, and then you can use that to spend on her website. So you can either buy on there, and she did it really as a relaunch and branding exercise, and that is just it's a technology website selling organic fair trade products. So she has a lot of, a really great mission behind her brand as well. And the Meraki bags is by a lady called Yosha Gupta, who actually runs a cash discount coupon business out of India, but is passionate about bringing Indian artistry back to life, and so employs women and men in India and does handmade drawn bags, and they're absolutely beautiful, and she's trying to revive the community aspect of that. So you're seeing a lot of different things coming here, and they're all using it not just for marketing and just for funding, but it's marketing and validation. Particularly, I think Microforest is a good one to show how they wanted to get it like to test the market before spending a lot of money, because that's just what they don't have as an organization, right? So what makes a campaign successful? I just want to say that it's researching, it's getting as much pledges up front, it's having great stories and videos. Social media is highly critical, and it's making sure you're very prepared in what you do. So that's a very kind of overview and just sharing some examples, and I think we'll be talking through more. So that's kind of crowdfunding, how we're seeing social enterprises use it here in Hong Kong. So thank you. Oh, sorry. Yes.
Before I go to my session, maybe we can follow through with her discussion. So there were quite a number of you who are NGOs, right? So I want to make sure that the question is, for those of you who are NGOs and maybe thinking of this, so that we can build on your discussion as well. Thinking of crowdfunding, one of the examples she used was Microforest, which is a Hong Kong entity here. So what's the engagement cycle for them? For example, for them, they're this interesting. Okay. For them, they say it's interesting. So how do we engage? Where do we begin? From a Hong Kong NGO perspective to, for example, engage with your organization or crowdfunding as a tool for crowdfunding? So
I've actually met Rainbow Chow, we've emailed a lot, but she was connected to me through, it was more like a referral how we kind of got involved with her. And, she started Microforest, and they approached us and said, look, we're interested in testing out a new idea, and we really don't know how to do that. So we have a very detailed manual that we share with our campaigners. It goes through the whole process, and we do a lot of support. And so we worked through her with that in terms of giving, what we look to do is give the best chance of success for the campaign. However, you still ultimately know your market, but it is, I think there's two key elements to crowdfunding. One is you develop the information around your campaign and making sure the story is very clear. It's very clear how the money is going to be used. The legitimacy and transparency is very, very important, I think, particularly for NGOs. But then the marketing. Now, the marketing is the challenge, and I think that's the case for anyone. It's always about how are you going to go out and find the people that this resonates with. And what I always say to people is that you need to look for your low-hanging fruit, right? Because it's a short cycle that you're marketing to and trying to get money from, and it primarily should be digital media. But you really should be thinking through, so for their product was like a terrarium glass, which had some plants in it. And then if you had it with kids, they could kind of make it pretty and draw the colors and everything. It was quite cool, right? So she was really looking at probably parents that maybe were going to have a birthday party that might buy 6 of them and the kids do it together, because it's something different, right? Everyone's always looking for something. So targeting that, targeting people that are a little bit more inclined to have a plant in their house, but also something that is sustainable, it's good for the environment, it's not plastics. I think there are some competing businesses out there with what Microforest does, and so theirs is a lot high quality. So they also had to look at who had the price points, because theirs wasn't plastic. A lot of them are plastic, actually. And theirs is imported from Holland, I believe. So, they were looking at price points, really trying to define if they wanted to sell 100 of them, where those people were. And if you think about your funnel coming down, there's 3 stages, right? You're getting out there into media, and only a percentage of that will convert, right? It's typical. So then you're looking at, if you're trying to get to say 100 sales, how are you backing into that? So we really talk to people about what are you using to market to get the eyeballs, so that you're getting, you still need probably 1,000 or so getting to your campaign to make the conversion. That's still at 10%, right? Which is quite high, so you could need more. You've got to be thinking about the eyeballs in terms of when you're using funding on crowdfunding. So that's what makes it quite interesting brand experience as well, because even though you might not take a direct sale during the campaign, which is your primary goal, but you are also getting in front of a lot of people because you've got an excuse to talk to people. And that's what you see crowdfunding is useful for, in terms of it's, even if you may not, you may be unsuccessful, and that's kind of okay as well, because then you've learned something, right? You've either learned that the price point's off, it was too expensive, or you didn't find the right target market. So you haven't spent too much money producing something for someone they won't buy. So these are also the benefits you can take away from it. yeah, sorry, talk all day.
Thank you, Nicole. So I think one thing we can really take away from her presentation is that, when we think about private funding, it's not always, like a big amount, like $20 million. Like, it could be small amounts. Go out there and really test your market, experiment. It's okay to experiment, and also really to be very accountable for your own legitimacy and in your own governance. I think that's one thing that I took away from Nicole. So, okay, next we'll have Philo. Thank you.
So we'll set up the slides first. So my name is Philo Alto, and while we're setting up the slides, what I want to do is to make this as interactive as possible. So I intentionally kept my slides short, I think about 10 slides or so. It's not there's a third one, yeah. But the reason why we also started with Nicole's presentation of crowdfunding, because when we think about funding for your NGO and or your social enterprise, it is important to realize that funding is just a mechanism to test out whether or not your idea, your products and services does make sense as a business model. And secondly, if you're doing a social enterprise, there's a social impact that's associated with that. So crowdfunding as a tool, if you think about 10 years ago, or even 15 years ago, people talk about private funding in terms of your idea, friends, families, and fools providing support. But because of the mainstreaming of technology and the accessibility of the technology platform that can make each and every one of us to be potential customers for an idea, and for the first movers to try that out, is something that democratizes and also enables an individual, an NGO, or social enterprise to test out whether their idea works in the first place, so that they don't spend too much time further out. And so that's why we also have the crowdfunding as a theme as it relates to this topic. So now I guess my slides are ready. So my organization, my name is Philo Alto. I'm the founder and CEO of Asia Valley Advisors. I come from a banking background many years ago, and it is part of my personal professional journey to understand what are the ways by which I can continue to make a living and also creating a positive impact. So from this journey, 6 years ago, I founded this organization to be a philanthropic advisory firm. When I say philanthropy, simply because philanthropy is a way to intentionally create positive social and environmental impact. And the tools by which you create that philanthropy is just 好心. I don't speak Cantonese, but the 好心 part, the goodness of heart, you have different ways of expressing that. Number one is via direct charitable donation. Number two is by mentoring or volunteering. Number three is by venture philanthropy. Number four is impact investing. And number five, as you've heard, crowdfunding. There are many ways and many tools by which those can be done. So this idea of mine to see, I don't have a social worker background. I don't have an expertise in deep community engagement, but what I do know is that how to blend my finance expertise and background to bring to the social issues that I care about. So that's really the context there. Okay, so we talked about inspiring and informing individuals and organizations. By individuals, people like myself, Kenny included, and perhaps Nicole as well, many of you, and including myself, come from private sector or directly from the NGO space or social enterprise. In other words, the concept of moving from one career to a different sector or career is becoming more and more commonplace. As such, it is more about to really learn about where is your angle, where is your role in the space. It is important to understand what are the ways by which you can bring your prior day job experience and background to bring forth to contributing to the social issues or the causes that you care about. So that's really the inspiring part. And inspiring is by actually exposing people like yourself and also myself included to see what are the ways by which I can make a difference. And organizations, these are the different entities. And I will actually mention in the subsequent slides that when you work on a social issue or community that you care about, don't assume that your own business model or your solution is the only solution or you're the only one who cares about it. There are many other organizations, stakeholders, and institutions that have been directly and indirectly touching on that, and which is why it's important to understand the overall broader picture of the environment within which you operate. Over the last 6 years, the work that AVA has done encompasses capacity building, research and impact investing, philanthropy, and I think for those of you who were in the earlier panel today when Brian Wong of the Hong Kong Jockey Club spoke at, that is the Philanthropy for Better Cities forum last year, and these are the different players, whether government, the Jockey Club, whether private sector individuals, whether Professor Michael Porter of the Harvard Business School, different people, different organizations look at the lenses of how they can create positive impact differently. And the work that I've done over the last few years through the Asia Valley Advisors and the different clients is really a reflection that when you want to create positive impact, there are many different people and organizations you have to work with. Here's a short snapshot of the Hong Kong social funding context within which you have public funding and also private funding and also crowdfunding as well. In a nutshell, we did a research report about 6 years ago called the Mind the Gap report. It's available on the website as well, wherein individuals and organizations who want to create positive social impact need to realize that there are many other sectors who are directly or indirectly touching on the space. You have the nonprofits, you have the social enterprise, you have the foundations, you have the corporates, whether from an investment perspective, whether through their product and services, or through their CSR arms, they all create impacts, whether positive or negative, whether intended or not intended. Then you have the government, either as a funder, as a policy maker, or as a rules maker in terms of directing and channeling resources towards certain social issues. And you also have the intermediaries, of which my organization and many other organizations are. Intermediaries simply facilitating the supply and demand of resources to the needs of those resources. How many of you have heard of the Sustainable Development Goals? Please raise your hands. Okay, I think about 60%. And how many of you are aware or familiar with the MDG's Millennium Development Goals, which is a precursor of this one? Okay, a few. In a nutshell, the United Nations used this 2 years ago as a Sustainable Development Goals. In the past, it's called MDG's, Millennium Development Goals. Back then, the thinking was that countries can jointly target different absolute indicators of social progress. And as a result of that, what they think about is that it's all about government providing support for development causes. But they realize that social issues itself is not able to be addressed by government alone. It's not able to be addressed by governments, by institutions, by corporates alone. There needs to be sustainability mindset across the different sectors, which is why they created this Sustainable Development Goals. Why this is important for you as an individual, even though you're based here in Hong Kong and focusing on your respective social issues, gradually this SDG framing is becoming more and more active globally, not just in Hong Kong. And as you look at your causes and the issues that you care about or you're currently working on personally, more and more of your future funders, whether private or public, will be looking at how their funding support touches on one or more of these social issues. And I will not go into the details for now, but except to say that if you really want to take your idea to the next level and speak the same language with your prospective and future funders, you need to be able to at least spend some time to understand what the SDGs are and what it means to you. We can go through that in the Q&A discussion later on. A few dimensions that I'd like to highlight. The first one is capital is growing, whether philanthropy or impact investing or whether sustainable, responsible investing or all the different social finance tools. That is already happening. Second one is, for those of you who are NGOs or social enterprise and you have a business idea, first and foremost, if you're looking at private funding from an investment perspective, make sure you're talking about a business model. If you're really talking about goodness of heart, expanding from 2 barbershops to 10 barbershops to 100 barbershops, but employing people with from a vulnerable sector, what have you, they probably will still need philanthropic funding because as a business model, it's still very difficult to scale that. So in other words, be very clear about your business model as a starting point and then decide how and where you should be focusing on funding. Not just purely saying, how can I make my organization look good so that the private investors will be looking at my organization. That's the second one. Third one, we talked about the rise of social innovation and technology. Social innovation, Jeff Morgan has spoke about that yesterday at the keynote, so I won't touch too much into that. But these are the different developments that's already making these changes as opportunities for you to look at your business model or your idea in slightly different ways. And fourth, we have the role of policymakers, the role of the government, the role of impact measurement. How do you measure and quantify the impact? Because more and more of your future funders will be relying on that. And of course, we have the cross-sector collaboration via the shared value framing. How many of you have heard of the shared value framing? I think if you were at the sessions yesterday, I guess the shared value framing is that being mindful that whatever you do, profession personally has social environmental impact, whether you like it or not, positive or negative. And the last one is one thing which is important, which is mind the gap. There are so many things that people have, so many haoxing, good ideas, say, my idea is the best one, please look at my organization, please look at my initiative. But if you take the time to understand the context, the social context of the issues that you care about, you realize that, wow, there's so much more for me to learn. And should I spend my time on business planning and really understanding my business model? Or should I also spend my time to understand who else is doing what? What can I learn from? And how can I collaborate or how can I compete? Should I create a business model around that? Happy to discuss further on the business model implication of that, but there's a lot. These are some of the dimensions of that. 2 more slides I want to show, and this is a bit crowded, I know. Most people have the idea that one day their company will be impact investment ready. But one of the research I've done a few years ago, which was cited in the research report, a book by Power of Impact Investing by Judith Rodin of the Rockefeller Foundation, is that usually there are only 1% of all the self-declared impact investment ready social enterprise who are typically funded by impact investors. The other 99% don't even get there. That 99% of social enterprise typically will still need venture philanthropic funding and philanthropic funding. And of those 1%, the special few, half of them are zombies, meaning barely surviving. A few of them close down, and a few of them make it on a sustainable basis. Why am I saying this? I'm saying this because impact investing sounds good, sounds cool as the new wave. It is important, but it's not for everyone. Especially for those of you who are in the NGO space or impact or the social enterprise space, have to be clear what is the starting point. When you scale your work, are you scaling your impact or are you scaling your business model? If you're scaling your impact, probably you're not ready for impact investment, but happy to discuss further on that. So that's the demand side of things. On the supply side of things, I think Kenny hopefully will also touch on some of these points. There are different investors for different social finance tools, and I won't go too much into that. And they go from the range of equity, debt, and all of these other products into those who are more impact-ready, impact-first criteria. I will not go too much into the details of that, except to say that find your own sweet spot, understand your business model, and then decide which of these potential target funders that you may want to tap into today as you're starting up, and when you scale up your organization, who are your ideal funders. Okay, so this one is private funding for you. It's a Doug, simply because I wanted to point out that making sure that you don't let your funding strategy dog tail wag the business model dog. Your dog is your business model. What is your core? And sometimes in the eagerness to look for financing, to make yourself attractive to future funders, you lose sight of your business model, and then at some point, things get, there's what you call the business mission drift, as well as the purpose drift of what you do. With that, I'll end it here. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Philo. I think I really like the line he opened with, that funding is a mechanism. So it means that it's actually a method, a means to an end. But if we, turn it around and say that the funding is the end of the game, then, you end up, going with the flow and forgetting what your fundamentals are. So I think that's a very good lesson for all of us. Okay, next I'd like to invite Kenny, and he will share a bit more about, how his organization works, and, especially for a lot of NGOs and social enterprises here, I think he'll give you some insight on, what the psychology of a funder is.
All right, good morning, everybody. It's great to have Nicole and Philo prep the floor and set the context. And I will say up front that Philo and I actually had no discussions really beforehand, but a lot of things fit hand in glove, as you'll see the presentation go on. So my name is Kenny. I work with the Ye Family Philanthropy, and we are about a 5-year-old family foundation, and we've have this mission here, which is to build capacity and promise young minds through education and social entrepreneurship. Now, the Ye family is quite a prominent family in Hong Kong, but is quite low profile. So before I worked for them, I actually didn't know who they were, but they kind of built a lot of the milestone and monumental buildings in Hong Kong over the years. And they did a lot of traditional philanthropy, giving to education specifically, so scholarships, professorships, and so forth. And when they established this foundation in about 2011, the same year that Philo established AVA, they really wanted to focus on a more purposeful and hands-on approach, what is now being called venture philanthropy, as opposed to a traditional philanthropy model. So the family and the foundation put together this great-sounding mission, and at the time didn't really know, what does it mean, and basically they thought that they would invest in some social enterprises and then give some grants in education, but the landscape didn't really lend itself to that at the time. So actually, drawing upon some of the gaps that were identified by Philo and his collaborators in the Mind the Gap report that was mentioned just now, one of the gaps in the Hong Kong ecosystem was that universities and academia in general were not providing educational courses on social entrepreneurship. And there wasn't enough of that, but there was a lot of demand from students for this kind of material. So we basically, leveraging our relationship with HKUST, piloted a course on social entrepreneurship and venture philanthropy. And we offered it at the business school because the thinking was that we wanted to change mindsets, which is ultimately the hardest thing to do, as we all know, as change makers. And we wanted people who went into business school doing an MBA who wanted to potentially go into consulting or finance. We wanted to plant the seed in their minds about social entrepreneurship and potentially using these business skills to change society. Now, we had a few pillars that we put in and designed into the course that we were adamant about. We wanted to have not just business school students, but also an interdisciplinary class so that people from engineering and sciences and social sciences could also work together, because in the real world, social entrepreneurs are emerging from every field. So we didn't want to just limit it to the business school students. And we also wanted the students to actually work with an existing social enterprise in Hong Kong, whose model we thought was innovative and game-changing. There are a lot of business plan competitions in Hong Kong now. We have the longest-running business plan competition, the Hong Kong Social Enterprise Challenge. And worldwide, there are a lot of business plan competitions, and that's all well and good. But we thought that it would be very important for students to actually work with an existing social enterprise and kind of derive inspiration from someone who's been with the problem for a long time, and to have a two-way learning. So this picture is our launch of our program, because we did a two-year pilot courses at HKUST, and then we partnered up with the Hong Kong Government's Social Innovation Fund, or SIE Fund, and we launched a program which we then labeled Nurturing Social Minds, which would be delivering 9 courses across 2 universities in 3 years. So for us, we could have kind of funded 1 course a year as a foundation ourselves indefinitely, but we wanted to bring something that we thought was really making impact on the students and on social enterprises alike, and to scale it up. So we partnered with the SIE Fund, and I dare say it's been quite a successful collaboration since. So as you can see, there's a few linkages in these relationships. So us as a philanthropic foundation, we are partnering with the government and with educational institutions in, I think, the first tripartite partnership of its kind, philanthropic, academic, public partnership in Hong Kong, if not Asia. Now, the other important partnership, as I mentioned already, is between our students and with social enterprises, which we call social venture partners. And we're all focusing on the goal of poverty alleviation, because the SIE Fund sits under the Commission on Poverty. So the social enterprises that we work with should be focused on poverty alleviation in Hong Kong. Now, the definition of poverty alleviation is quite wide, and so it's not only a lack of resources, or the beneficiaries that is, but also lack of opportunities. So we'll go into some of the examples of the social enterprises in a minute. Now, so we scour the city all the time for social enterprises that we can work with. So all of you that put your hands up and have social enterprises, we'd love to talk to you. And this is some of our criteria. So some of them are a bit more simple: established legal entity, whether Section 88 or a limited company, at least 1 full-time staff. Again, cater to poverty relief in Hong Kong, and it's preferable to have been through an incubator so that we know that the social enterprise has been vetted by somebody, but it's not necessary. Now, the last criteria, which is a bit more mercurial, is a proof of concept. And we want our social venture partners to have gone through the more difficult initial stages of ideation, prototype, and we want a proven product or service that has shown itself to produce some sort of figures in the market. Now, this could be number of beneficiaries that you've served and catered to. It could be amount of funding that you've gotten outside from external funders. It could be the amount of business transactions that you've had, sales, break-even level. It could be financial figures. But we want to see some kind of track record so that we can help you scale up, but we're not just funding or partnering with somebody with just a business plan. The reason for this is because we want to expose our students to successful social entrepreneurs, and quite frankly, you have to go through the really difficult first few steps in order to be considered a successful social entrepreneur in our minds. So, again, we're reproducing this slide that Philo had on the SDGs, so I don't have to repeat it because Philo just gave a very graceful introduction. But we just want to highlight that the social enterprises that we've been working with have focused on 10 out of the 17 SDGs. And we've had, including the 2 courses that are on now, we have done 10 courses and 4 social enterprises per course. The reason why there's 39 is because we actually have our first repeat social enterprise. They're coming back for a second time. You'll see that actually, even though we're focused on poverty alleviation, we also have climate change and sustainable cities there, 11 and 13. These were social enterprise partners that we worked with before our collaboration with the SIE Fund. I think we actually have a social venture partner in the mix there, Raymond, who was partnering with us in the summer. Right, so how does this work? We basically have our 4 social enterprise partners. At the first class, they will come in and pitch their story to our class of MBA students. We have about 25, 28 students per class. And they will come in, pitch their story, and they will be pitching for skill sets as well. They say, we have a problem, we have this project, we need help with marketing or branding or financial models or fundraising or a particular skill set that they need experienced MBA students to help them with. The MBA students then choose who they want to work with. And then over the course of 12 weeks, the students will be helping the social enterprise with their problems. They hand in for us a due diligence report, so we know that they understand their partner. And they also develop a funding proposal and funding presentation to vie for $250,000 provided by our foundation. If they win, then they also have a final deliverable of an implementation plan, which typically goes for 6 months. And if they don't win, they actually provide a alternate financing proposal so that they can help the social enterprise to find funding sources from around the city with their new updated funding presentation. Now, the value add that we have is, of course, 6 to 8 dedicated MBAs for 12 weeks. And we actually have one of our MBAs sitting in the crowd right here as well. And I can tell you they're brilliant and they're passionate. And actually the level of engagement has gone up over the years. So we're quite proud of our students. And so again, updated pitch proposal and presentation, they really make them jazz and have that wow factor. They take a crack at measuring the impact of the social enterprise. So we teach them these concepts in class and then they apply them immediately towards the live case. They have a 1 in 4 chance, of course, of winning $250,000 from us. There's a lot of networking, both within the social enterprise system, but also with speakers that we bring in from the outside, and we bring in judges from that are top-level executives in industry to come judge our program. And then they, of course, have a final deliverable. After the course, we provide additional networking and HR brokerage, shall we say, to social enterprises as they need. We also alert them on potential funding needs and other funding schemes that there are happening in the city and in the region. And we are building up our alumni network, in fact, so that these students who have finished these engagements and who are all passionate and ready to go, they can actually do further engagements with our social enterprise partners because we want to build on that momentum. And a lot of the feedback that we get is, oh, the engagement is not long enough. I wish we could work for longer. So we're trying to cater to that feedback as well. A little bit of the timeline. So again, the foundation was started off in about 2011. And we started talking with HKUST about 2012, kicked off our first class in 2013 and 14. And then 2015, we partnered up with the SIE Fund. I'd like to talk about 3 examples here very quickly. The first is 2 presents. You'll see at the bottom here. Excuse me. What happened was they won $250,000 from our course. Then they took the fresh new funding presentation that the students prepared for them, and then they went to another social enterprise grant competition and got another sum of money from there, another $250,000. And then they had put in some money on their own. So in total, they had about $1 million. And then they took that and went to another intermediary of the SIE fund, the Impact Incubator, and then got another $1 million from the SIE fund. So they took our money and sort of, quadrupled it and more, 8 times leverage on the money that they got from our course through. So it was not only the money that got them through that, but also the work that the students had put in for them to help them clarify their message. I'd also like to highlight HKTS, which is Hong Kong Translingual Services, right above 2 presents there. There's an interesting case because usually the partners come in with a particular project in mind that they want to engage the students with. Now, HKTS, they provide translation services for people who do not speak either English or Cantonese in public hospitals. So typically South Asian individuals, and so Punjabi, Bangla, and Hindi, and Nepali. So they already have this platform, and they're doing very well, but they wanted to expand their scope of operations because their one client was the hospital authority. So if another provider went in or they canceled that contract, then they would be out of business. So they had came to our students looking for an idea on where they could go next, right, and expand beyond their current services. And they thought that maybe they would explore the hearing impaired market. But our students, after their research, figured out that actually the hearing impaired in Hong Kong are already very well served by 3 very large NGOs. And so in their research process, they actually recommended that they go to another direction. And HKTS actually agreed on this new direction, which was to train these South Asians and ethnic minorities in 2 particular areas where the families, the fathers typically work, which is construction and logistics. So long story short, they were open-minded enough to allow the students to help them pivot, and they agreed on the recommendations, and then they won the grant and moved on. So moving on, here's some feedback. And basically, Maker Bay, which is will be presenting later on in a workshop at SES, they will, they didn't have the skill set of financial modeling, even though they're very good at what they do. So our students help them out with that. A little bit about our students, mostly MBAs, and we have PhDs, even other postgraduates, very talented undergraduates, and so forth. They come from all over, a lot of exchange students, so there's a very diverse dialogue and background, and they're all very happy with the course. 14 of our students have formed their own social alumni, and Kieran here is actually helping to build up our alumni group, which I mentioned earlier. I'll just skip this and go straight to tips. So just 5 quick tips, and all to do with relationship, because at the end of the day, it's a relationship that we feel like we have with our partners. We do see our social venture partners, and we call them partners, we don't see them as grantees, we do see them hand in hand. So it's really important to understand who you're talking to first, and understand us as people, and not just run into the door and start pitching your solution or your organization. It's really important to have that dialogue. Again, the Hong Kong Translingual Services example showed that you had to keep an open mind is really important, so that we want to work with partners, both NGOs and social enterprises, who are coachable, who are open-minded, and who are willing to take on advice and not be too sort of stuck in their ways. We personally like to put a toe in the water, so to speak, so we'll test out a lot of relationships with small collaborations and then slowly build onto that. So I would say as a tip, if you're looking to fundraise, that it's important to keep goodwill with funding partners and not just focus on, oh, I didn't get the money today, or I didn't get it tomorrow. It'll come, and we look at it as long-term. Philo had talked about patient capital, and that's what we see it as. So I guess you have to have patience as well when you're fundraising. Our best partners actually come to us and add value to us as well. So they will come to us, they will provide us with connections, give us market intel, and introduce us to new people that we could work with. So we like to see it as a two-way relationship and not just a one-way relationship. And finally, we love it when our partners come to us to give us updates without us having to ask them. They tell us what's been going on and keep that dialogue open. So I will just leave with that. If you want to find out more about the program, this is the website, and there is also a form on there to apply to be a partner in our program if you are interested. And thank you very much.
Thank you, Kenny. So I like that he ended off on the note of relationships, how you manage your funders. When I spoke to him over the phone last week, he told me that actually one of his line that he wanted to say was, "Don't treat your funders like an ATM." Yeah, which I get treated like an ATM a lot, so it doesn't feel good. So so we'll thank you, three of our speakers. We'll now have a panel session where we can discuss a bit more, and we'll very quickly open it up to the floor for any burning questions that you have. So may I please invite Philo, Nicole, and Kenny? Okay, is this on? Hello? Maybe switch it on. Hello? Okay, all right. I just want to pick up from where Kenny left off. When talking about relationships, having to understand your funders. And I think a lot of people forget that funders, we kind of hide behind very fancy organization names, but at the end of the day, we're all human beings. So how do I, understand what is the human psyche behind a funder? Like, how do I really get to know you? And, how do I get my foot in the door? I think that's, for a lot of small organizations, it seems to be quite intimidating. So what would you suggest?
Okay, well, we're actually quite active in the market. We go to a lot of different events, social enterprise events. We come here, and we are very open to having that chat, that initial get-to-know-you discussion, which means I end up drinking a lot of coffee. And it's helpful to have a meeting where we usually run our meetings. I tell you what I do, you tell me what you do, and we'll see how we can collaborate in the middle. Now, some of the social enterprise partners that I've been talking to, we've had an ongoing conversation for maybe 18 months, 24 months before it materializes into a collaboration where we can fit them into a course where their business is reflected in a very good mix with other businesses. So it's not necessarily that I don't want you to collaborate with us today or tomorrow, but it has to be the right timing for both of us. Sometimes the timing isn't right for them either, but we're very happy to engage, and sometimes a friendly email to come in and we will start that conversation.
Okay, so everybody get his business card and email him.
Yeah, I'd like to kind of really emphasize that point, because I think as an enterprise, everyone's at a different point in their journey. And when you're talking to someone who has the funds, everyone is different in terms of, what your focus is on, how much you're willing to give, the expectations where you are in the journey. And so I think that it is finding that match is quite important. It's not just a given that, yes, you say you give out money, I'm the right person, we're all in the social enterprise space. That's not the case at all. It is really digging a bit deeper and doing that exploration. And I think going back, right? Because, if someone doesn't give you money, they've given you feedback. That's valuable as well. Take that on and act upon it. Because also when you act upon it and then you go back, you can say, look, I did this. You said this would be of value. You're quite experienced in having seen more businesses than I've seen. Really taking on those aspects, I think, is of value as well.
I also like to say that every funder is different from each other, and you need to be very clear about that. So I have a simple 4-step approach to that. Number one is, first you have to understand when you approach or you start research your funder, check their starting points. Some funders, they are social first or impact first or finance first, whatever it is. Some funders, they are treating it as pure investment. When it's an investment, be very clear that they treat it as return of their money as a first and foremost, and then hoping that there's a financial return afterwards. If, for example, they're treating it as their maybe grant budget, but they are dabbling in impact investing, then their comfort level and their risk tolerance will be a bit higher. Meaning, if for whatever reason they like your organization, they like the idea, they give it a try, and for some reason it didn't work out, your organization did not make it, or you were not able to pay back the money, they treat it as philanthropy. They're just as happy to donate to you anyway, but they rather support it as a venture philanthropy. That's fine as well. So that's the first one. Understand very well who they are, what their motivations are. The number two is understanding what is your definition of success, and does it align with them? If your definition of success for your startup or for your business is scaling impact, not necessarily scaling your business model. In other words, your business model might not be sustainable, but you know that the housing of your work is important to you and you're passionate about, then you probably ensure that does that match with your funder? If the answer is no, they're probably the wrong fit for you. That's the second one. The third one is understand what they mean by scale. Does their scale, in terms of what they want to do, their definition of scale, matches with yours? If the answer is yes, then go ahead. If the answer is no, maybe you can find some other funder, because otherwise the bad part there is that you actually try to customize your model to suit their needs, and after the funding is over, let's say they fund you after 2 years, then you realize, okay, they're not funding me anymore because they expect me to, win my dependence on them. You don't know who else to go to, and suddenly your model suddenly changed. That's the third one. And the last one is gain and build trust. Part of the building trust is that, like Kenny and Le-hui said, you don't treat them as ATM, and really understand what is your starting point and why you're doing what you're doing, what energizes you for doing what you're doing, and then afterwards letting them know that you're still with them whether or not they give you funding or not.
Yeah, I'd like to share a bit about what my CEO likes to say about looking for funders, because it is a very long process. You don't just park aside like 2 weeks and go out on a roadshow. We're not investment bankers here. He says it's kind of like dating. You have to go pak to, get to know the person, drink coffee, understand them, and then after that, then you start talking about getting married, right? Because getting their money is a commitment on your part. You have to do reporting, you have to be accountable, you have to make sure they're happy with you. So it's really a long process of, and you have to be quite patient about it, I think. What I've experienced by myself is that, when people are very impatient and they call me up, like cold call, and the first thing they ask is like, do you have money for me? Like, seriously, I just want to hang up. Because it's just really, you're not interested in building a relationship. And I think that one thing that we keep emphasizing here, and I don't think we're emphasizing enough, is that it's really about a relationship. So on that point, one thing that I think we did not talk so much about is about so-called reporting and impact measurement. How important do you think that is for your funder relationship? Or do you think there's something even more important than that to keep the relationship going? Or for like Nicole, how can you keep the people who made the donation or that crowdfunding contribution to you, how do you keep them continually excited? Because hopefully you have more products coming along the way, right?
Well, I think it's just this ongoing engagement, right, and managing, because the thing is, things don't always go right as you proceed through your journey, and you do. I think with a funder or with donations, you set expectations of how things are going to happen. And the biggest thing is maintaining communication, explaining, so when we get people funded, there's a deliverable date. It's typically maybe 3 months away, and part of that, if they're not going to deliver, it's being very transparent as to why and getting in advance and explaining that in advance, right? Because what you don't ever want is someone chasing you. Why haven't I seen this? What's happening with the money? Right? You want to be on the front foot always with someone that gives you money. however that may be. And I think that you're always managing expectations. And so what we really do recommend is, we focus a lot around pre-launch marketing and getting out there, but it's really how you can, continuing to be engaged with those people who have committed to give you money, whether that's a small amount of $10 or that's a larger amount of $250,000, right? I mean, it all adds up, and it's part of your reputation building, right? Because you're building a brand, business brand, but I mean, really building the brand around who you want to be in terms of your enterprise and how you interact with people, and that's at every point. So that for us is what we really emphasize, is stay on top of communication.
Okay, so I'll address your point and actually add a little bit on something I forgot to mention in my presentation. In terms of impact measurement, we actually build it into our program that the students will help you measure impact. But I think in general, for every organization, it's important to be numerical. So on the one hand, you want to have a story and cases that you want to tell and kind of tug at the heartstrings. It's important to have that so that the funder can kind of feel for your cause. But on the other hand, you want to appeal to their mind and also give proper statistical kind of results to show that what you're doing is working. So for every organization, maybe an SROI model is not fit, or if you say we produce $8 of SROI, it doesn't mean so much. What's important is to find a metric for your own organization that really measures what you do, and then to espouse that to your funders. So if it's, for example, if I take the example of FoodLink, which is one of our current partners, their metric could be the number of meals that they deliver, or the amount of food that they save up, which is part of their mission. So you have to find that for your own organization. And actually, one of the trends that is happening in the funder space is that more funders are being more collaborative. So we are talking to each other a lot, which makes it even more important for you to keep a good relationship with the funders, because they will talk to each other about you, and there's a reputation in the market. And we want to help everybody, but we can't, because we have limited time, resources, and allocation of our hands-on approach. So we find ourselves in the position of broker a lot. So we like you and we can't help you, but we have that good conversation. We can introduce you potentially to another funder who is more fit for your mission. So it's good to keep that in mind, and and keep goodwill with everybody.
I think from my side, when you talk about impact measurement, evaluation, and reporting, it is important, but to some extent. What I mean by that is that when you think about the impact of what you do, I always say that impact is personal, but the social issues or the causes that you're trying to address is objective. And sometimes the latter part is something that is underestimated. And what I mean by that is that if you are starting or clearly doing a social enterprise as a business model, number one is you do want and need funding from whoever you want to get from, because you want to get it started, you want to pilot it, you want to see what works or what doesn't work. So that's the initial part. But later on, assuming that everything works well, everything goes your way, and you're able to scale your plan, you're able to scale your impact, you then think about, if everything is right, who are my ideal funders? And if these funders require certain reporting from me, is my organization able to sustainably and systematically measure and evaluate and report those impacts? Because sometimes what happens is that you get a legacy funder at the start, but later on, as your organization grows, they may not necessarily be the right organization for you. In fact, they're happy to actually pass on their support to someone else. Then you realize that suddenly the reporting requirement of your ideal funder going forward is not, you're not equipped for that. You suddenly lose track of things, and then what am I doing here? What should I be focusing on? So I think those are the two things that you will be need to focus on. Thanks.
So can I just say something to the relationship? I'm just thinking of, I was telling Kenny earlier about this, two female co-founders I met yesterday who are starting an education-related app but it's very much a social enterprise, but it's going to have it's an app. And but we were chatting about how much money they needed to raise to build an app, and it's expensive, right? I don't know if anyone's explored this, but they're high numbers. So what we were chatting about was what proportion would be crowdfunding, what proportion would be a grant, what other types of funding models would they look at. Now, you don't want to go like crazy and have too many to manage, but I mean, we often see that, and I think relationship's important, because I immediately was like, what do you focus on? What do you focus on? Because I'm meeting people that I recommend on, and I'm always trying to find that fit for someone. So when I meet with people, we discuss crowdfunding. It's not always the right fit. So my next thing is, okay, well, who do I know in my network that I can send you on to? And I think that's always a good thing to think about, is that when you're talking to someone, they know someone, right? You know, it's always kind of this ongoing aspect. So being very clear around what you want is important.
So communication, relationship management, know yourself, know your fit. I think, yeah, that's a lot of work. So, yeah, okay. I'd like to open the floor to questions, because I know that I see a lot of people jotting down notes, so I know you're paying attention. Do you have any questions for us? Anyone? Okay, Cindy, I see you thinking. Do you
I just want to know that is it very often do we need the applicants to do some sort of program before handing any application that will help us to get a success application?
Okay, so in case you couldn't hear that, she asked if you need to run a pilot program or like do some experiment before you go for funding. Would that help with the rate of success?
I would say that in order to work with us within the kind of constraints of our program, then yes, you do need to have a pilot. You need to show some measure of success before you come in. We've actually included social enterprises who were sort of pre-pilot or were testing their pilot, and we also included them, but I think the engagement wasn't as prolific as it could be. But it doesn't preclude you from starting the conversation with us. So we actually nurture social enterprises sometimes from pre-pilot stage, when they're just thinking about what they want to do and they're just asking about ideas. Then we'll coach them, and then we'll talk to them a few months later, and they said, oh, we've done this, and then like Nicole was saying, oh, like they took our advice, and then they kind of do a few more and work along the steps a few more, and then they come back, and then we kind of coach them through, and we end up having a lot of ownership over that business as well, even though we haven't sort of formally collaborated yet. So I think it's good to ask advice, and something that Le-hui said earlier, but kind of can be hammered home, is you ask for advice and not money first, and you might actually get money at the end. So funders do see a lot of different models and different businesses, so they may be able to give you valuable advice so that you can put that in your pilot to increase the chances of success.
And I was just going to say, I met with 2 investors recently, and they were completely different. One wanted it at idea stage, and that person would be willing to take on ideas and partner, and therefore they worked together to help develop the business with them. So they were going to invest, but they wanted to be part of that from day dot. They didn't want anyone too far into their idea, because it's too hard to pivot, and it would be too hard to work with them. I met another investor who was like, minimum 3 years financial statements, only has X. And so a little bit does depend on the person you've approached, because, what do they... I think the first one I mentioned, he really wanted to be part of that journey, part of the business, and he had a lot that he could add value on, and he wanted to make sure that that was captured. But if it was too far down the line, he felt that would be difficult for him to influence, where the others were like, we're probably more going to help you grow, more financially, I would say, would be what they were focused on. So just an example of investors, whether they're, that's what I've been seeing. It's always interesting.
I'd like to go slightly off tangent to that, to say that I think here in Hong Kong, most of us are type A, like get it done, how to focus on the business model, how to refine it, how to pilot, so on and so forth. But I can assure you, and for those of you who have already started social enterprise or your own company, especially with focus on social issues, I can assure you when you first started off with your idea and you have an initial theory of change or impact that you want to create, think about, and maybe that's 2 years ago, maybe 5 years ago, what have you, think about what you're thinking right now is compared to where it was before. And I say this because most often the people that I have come across and spoken to is that they spend a lot of time thinking that their idea is the best idea in the world, and then trying really, really hard to refine, pilot all of this idea. The simple question I simply ask them, so who do you see your equivalent in the US or UK or elsewhere? And if, for example, they can't even name those peers, it means they have not even gotten to the surface of the social issues they're trying to approach, number one. Number two is, try to ask, and I'm diverting slightly, try to ask I always ask the 5 whys. Why am I doing this? What's my model? And then how my idea works, how will my model work if I do that? Then challenge yourself again, second time. What's wrong with my model, or something like that? Test it out. Have I done enough research on the market? Have I done enough research on the social issues, on the competitor, on the context, on the regulation? And ask yourself a third time, a fourth time, and a fifth time. I would assure you that if you spend the time looking at that, in addition to refining your business model, you'll be way more effective and honest to yourself, because this is tough work. And you're also way more effective with your prospective funders, because the questions that you'll be able to address when they ask you the same questions and how you respond to them, if you show a sense of a lack of awareness of the context of the social issues, not just the immediate symptoms, but also the root causes, they will be saying, oh, thank you, great idea, I like your passion, come back to me later on. You want to short circuit that. If you actually show the context and be honest, I'm still early stage, I really want to understand better, then you build their trust. They may not be your funder right now, they'll be your advisor, and later on you might eventually stumble on the right business model and then pursue that. That's a much better use of your time. So efficiency is not necessarily effectiveness.
I'd like to add, ladies first.
I was going to say, because I love what Kenny was talking about in terms of that, because that's why we've brought out training and what you're doing with, because you have a great idea. It doesn't mean we know how to execute on it in terms of from a business perspective, in terms of delivery perspective. It's quite exhausting and hard to work out all that information, to know my business development model, my customer development model, my segmentation, my financials. I mean, it's not like people know this, right? And I find that there does need to be an education element even before you're thinking of going to funders, for you to be adequately able to have a good conversation, right? Because you are better positioning yourself when you're talking to someone asking for money. You understand your business model, you understand where you'd like it to go. The more you can entrain yourself, and this is what I've certainly learned in the past 18 months, because I have talked to a lot of startups, and I myself a startup. The earlier you can get on top of this information to help you be better equipped, not just the faster you can move, just more effectively, more time effectively, because otherwise you're going to spend 3 years trying to do something that if you had done some training or gotten engaged in something like Kenny's doing, the Ye Family Foundation, so, you're just going to be making a better use of time, right? And achieving your ultimate goal of making a difference, right? I think that's important.
Okay, so I want to build on, we're just building on each other, some stuff that Nicole and Philo was saying. So kind of staying with the problem and not focusing on your solution. Part of what we like to see is actually people using design thinking principles. So kind of getting feedback from the beneficiaries and people who are part of the social problem you're trying to solve before you develop a solution, so that you're addressing a problem, as opposed to baking something in a lab and then you refine it and then you bring it to market and actually it doesn't fit. So that's one thing. And in terms of pilot, we actually like to see people who have done stuff offline before going to build an app, because a lot of people, not everyone, are coming to us and saying, we want to build an app for this. And it's expensive to build an app, and it's even more expensive in terms of time and resources to maintain an app and to continually update it. So we like to see people who maybe the solution is online at a certain point, but they have an offline sort of MVP, minimum viable product, beforehand, and they test that the market is receptive to something like this before they spend that huge investment in an app.
So do your homework, be nimble, and just take advantage of every opportunity. Do we have, yes, please. Could you please introduce yourself?
Yeah, sure. So I am from mainland China, for Lao. Yeah, so I'm very curious for Hong Kong investors. Are you guys interested in social enterprises that have markets in mainland China?
Did everyone hear that? So would Hong Kong investors be interested in enterprises in mainland China? I think, Philo, this seems like a question for you.
I think two parts here. Currently, the Hong Kong market, the Hong Kong social ecosystem is a bit Hong Kong-centric. I would say that, more locally community-based. That's not necessarily a bad thing, because you're trying to pilot solutions and products that is contextually relevant to the local community. So not a bad thing. But what we're seeing here, and one thing that resonated in the conference that my organization helped curate for the Hong Kong Joint Club on Philanthropy for Better Cities, is that Hong Kong is considered as a finance or social finance hub for experimentation, for social entrepreneurship and social innovation that could be replicated and also scaled into Greater China. There's a lot of entrepreneurs in China, or I guess foundations in China, trying to understand and learn from best practices in Hong Kong, not because of the scale, because scale is way better and bigger in mainland China, but simply because the regulatory regime and also the structure is way more established here, and then finding ways by which how that can actually transplanted and replicated to mainland China. So it's not in terms of physical distribution of products and services, it's more in terms of the validation of our business model and see how the mindset and the thinking, the corporate governance can be replicated and applied to mainland China.
So we have programs in China as well, though we've mostly been focusing on the NGO side. So we work with Teach for China currently. But in terms of social enterprises, we are actually linking up with a lot of foundations and organizations that work with social enterprises in China, because we want to constantly understand what's happening north of the border, potentially them coming to Hong Kong, potentially introducing our partners to China. And actually, I was having a conversation the other day about actually having more integration between Hong Kong and Shenzhen, just north of the border, because there's a lot going on there. And I think social entrepreneurs, as well as the incubators, as well as the foundations, can benefit by sort of crossing that border more and maybe have some short-term secondments or something. But I think in general, collaboration is more important than anything. Both within funders as well as between funders and fundees, but also between Hong Kong and our other counterparts outside of Hong Kong.
Yes, please. Please introduce yourself.
I'm definitely from Fair Trade Hong Kong, is small-scale NGOs that promoting fair trade. I just want to ask, it's an easy questions, but I would say also difficult one. How is the success rate? I mean, for how many applicants to you guys, and then the ratio of they really finally get the fundings or able to launch their program in the crowdfunding source. And also there's another questions for Nicole about crowdfunding, because I know that is how it promotes the digital social media is a critical success factor for getting crowdfunding. Will the platform offer any, advice or resources to do that kind of promotion? Because sometimes for small-scale NGOs, it will lack of that kind of expertise and resources to do that kind of wow effect. Yeah, that's my questions.
I'll just start in terms of the projects we've had come out of crowdfunding in terms of, so we've had all of our campaigns bar one successfully fund. And going on, the fact is running any form of startup business is hard. whether social, it doesn't matter what you label it, right? It's lonely, it's hard work. I come from PricewaterhouseCoopers, right? And I always say, I came from a massive brand and I didn't appreciate the brand when I was there. And, I always feel like I was at the dinner table already, right? But as a small business myself, I'm like at the front door. I'm not even at the front door. I'm out on the street knocking on the gate, trying to get in, right? And that, I think, is what, as a smaller business, whether you focus as a social enterprise, it's hard work, right? So, that's where we've seen with the crowdfunding campaigners come out. We've actually seen, I would say, good ongoing work coming out of them. I shared some examples earlier. Part of because the way that we differentiate ourselves is, first of all, we think that crowdfunding, we focus on entrepreneurs, okay? We're not just more broadly, just if you've got a project or anything, we look at entrepreneurs. But also it's the first step in your business journey. And so when we talk about marketing during crowdfunding, you should be forming relationships that you want to have on an ongoing basis. These are the people you should be talking to that will become your media partners. And I don't mean that in a fancy way. That could be anyone. But these are the people that will help continue to promote you. So that's really important, that I find for a lot of the entrepreneurs we work with, it's like turbocharging their business, right? Because a lot don't have social media in place, they don't have mailing lists in place, they haven't done production before. There's a lot there that hasn't been done, and they're having to put a lot in place quite quickly. And I think that having a time frame actually is quite useful. In terms of marketing, we have a detailed manual that has a lot of tips and tools, and we talk through how best to utilize media. And so we have our own press list, we have our own social media, we have our own newsletters. We promote through that, but we also give you, it's like nearly 40 pages, but there's a fair bit in there around how you should approach marketing. And the reality is, if you're doing through crowdfunding, digital marketing, Twitter, for example, in Hong Kong is not very popular, right? So you'll see about 3% of sales through Twitter. If you look at Facebook, Facebook's a much more popular mechanism to communicate your brand. But again, you don't see high, I think, in terms of, it's probably around 12% in the crowdfunding space. It's mainly newsletters and emails where you see around the 24% of conversion on sales in terms of trying to get someone to click and buy. And I'm quite practical on this stuff. With what I do, it's click and buy. This is what I'm trying to help you put in place, the ability to do that. But it's things like key influencers, it's bloggers. If you are going to use social media, particularly around Facebook, it's 70% of it should be much more interactive versus salesy. You'll get a lot more interaction through blogs that talk about your mission, talk about something that's a pain point for the people that you're working with or your business. That's the type of thing that feeds onto your own website or feeds into your own sales impressions. We've seen, particularly if you're quite niche, if you can partner with an organization or a blogger or an influencer, and not always paid, but if you can partner with someone that has a big audience that really matches into what you're doing, you can nearly pick up 30 to 40% of your crowdfunding funds through that. And I'll give you two examples. We had Knots and Strokes crowdfund. It's Sri Lankan based. There's quite a well-known Sri Lankan social media someone who's quite well known, and he has a very strong social media presence. He loved what Sharon was doing and went on, and he just got her thing and went on. He said, everyone, right now, just start funding. And quickly he picked up $3,000 for her in a couple of hours, because someone from America funded her, someone from here funded her, because he just said, this is important to me, and I know you know me and trust me what I'm saying. And that didn't cost her anything. That was an introduction. The other one we had, the other one I've heard is someone that was, it was a product, and they found a blogger who didn't charge them, and they wrote an article about them, and 40% of their funding came from that one article, because that was an engaged audience. So the problem is, I think it's good to get into things like South China Morning Post. All of this is good for ongoing brand presence. It's good for what we call SEO, backlinks, building your brand. And when I say brand as social enterprise, you're building a brand, right? You want people to know what the issue is. That's the brand you're building, right? You want to make an impact. So that's all very good, but then you need to look for kind of like direct intervention in terms of getting funding. Who are the people that can make an impact quite quickly? So that's how I differentiate marketing efforts. It's kind of that branding, which is good to have, and then there's, okay, where do I make impact quite quickly?
So really storytelling and also just, being very targeted. Yeah. So any questions on the side? Yes, please.
Hi, my name is Jackie, and previously I had a tech startup, private sector, doing okay, and then right now I want to do a new startup in we have some social impact, social good. So my question is, the fund, when I want to do fundraising for my company, and apart from the money me and my partner put in Hong Kong, we know there was some funding from private and also public sector, like this morning. And what advice would you give me? Which public or private funding should I start with? And how to how to approach them, basically. That's my question. Yeah.
That's a big question, Jackie. Can I ask, first of all, are you a limited company or Section 88, or what's your legal status?
It's a social enterprise, so it's a for-profit, but also emphasizes social impact.
Yep. So you're limited by shares company.
Yes.
Like what's your set? Yeah.
Yes, like
Okay.
private companies, yeah. Make money. Yeah.
Right. So I guess the good thing about being a social enterprise, quite frankly, is that you have access to several different pools of capital. Private sector startups may not have as much access to grants. So you can actually start off with some of the grants money. You can do crowdfunding, and there are mechanisms by which you can get matching funds from public funds as well. So it's really a blended approach, I think. And in terms of marketing, what we see is, a social enterprise at the end of the day is a business, right? So if you're focusing on an investor that is more commercial and is looking more for pure returns, then you would position yourself as more on the business side. If you're looking for funding that is more a grant, or that is more mission focused or impact focused, then you should position yourself accordingly. Not to say that you change your business according to the funder, but maybe the packaging would be slightly different. Does that help? Yeah.
Thank you.
I think another thing to add there is that luckily in Hong Kong, and I guess common in a lot of developed cities around the world, is that many of the people who you come across in terms of the people you want to engage with to talk about your business model or your idea or your plan, is that they meet you as an individual. As an individual, they may wear multiple hats. They may have some ideas. The fact that they're willing to meet with you specifically about your idea means that they probably have looked at the social issues or the project that you are planning to run with, and they could have already identified a few individuals, organizations, stakeholders that they can bounce off ideas with you. And then you can start mix and match in terms of the how part. So focus less on the how. The how will follow in terms of how to approach them, how to engage them, whether this versus that. It's more about engaging with them and how they respond to you, whether they see that as, okay, if your model is purely impact first, it's, maybe you should consider applying for this government funding. Maybe you should consider crowdfunding. These are the types of responses. You may have an initial hypothesis. Maybe the ones who will be interested in my model is XYZ investor or philanthropic funder. But turns out when I spoke with this person, he or she said, you should be looking at something else, which means that your initial idea might be different in terms of what appeals to them might be different from your initial idea, and that's an opportunity for you to iterate and position and recalibrate your idea as well. So treat them as an individual, then afterwards they will make suggestions for you, and then afterwards you build on that. Eventually you'll figure out, am I on the right track? Should I reincorporate as a nonprofit instead? Stuff like that.
Okay, I think we have enough time for one question. One more question?
Two. We have two.
Two, okay, right. Okay. Yes, I can hear you.
Okay, perfect. My name is Faith, and my organization is DAX Network. We started a year ago, and we have been through about 25 schools to promote active fathering in Hong Kong. However, I'm running into a problem of finding funds. I have another 20 some more schools that I think they have listed that I can go into, but I have no funds to go into them. So where would you suggest us to do? We are an NGO with Section 88.
Give your business card to Kenny.
Should we also ask
Yes.
questions?
Very short question, because the previous session is about public funding, and I think we can see one common thing from the public funding is they need to see the track record, especially from the project owner. But for the most of the social enterprise or the NGOs, as Philo has just mentioned, most of the people may change just from one career to another because of their good heart and want to do some other things. So for the private funding, is there a kind of track record that you want to look at before you grant the fund? Or how do you assist these kind of the social entrepreneurs who are new in the market?
Okay, I'll try to take a crack at both. So your question first, actually there are some public funding mechanisms out there that are for ideation stage social enterprises. So if you have an idea, there are some programs out there, specifically Good Seed, that I think in my mind, that you could actually find people to join your team and to get initial grant funding to get it off the ground. And then based on that success, then you can kind of move on and get a second stage and so forth of funding. So there are mechanisms for earlier stage funding on the public side. On the private side, that I understand, it's a bit less, but it really depends again on the funder. So I can't speak for the entire funding network, and I think things are always changing as well. If you have the right idea in the right social area, then potentially you can get funding from the right people. So there are funders kind of coalescing on various issues, particularly the elderly and early childhood education. So if you can leverage the right sort of social issue and you make the right pitch, you could possibly happen. And for faith, I think that's probably more of an offline conversation, quite frankly. I'll need to understand more of the specifics of your situation. Yeah.
Yes, I could take a crack at your question as well. From what I noticed when we go out to meet funders is that, especially for a lot of private funders, it's very personality driven. So like a family foundation, because the founder believes in a certain thing, and then, that's why they drive it in that kind of direction. So I think a lot of people tend to, as we said before, they tend to think of like funding as the end game. But really, if you try to go and understand, where are they coming from? Oh, maybe my father was very poor when I was young, and so now I'm rich. I want to give money to this kind of enterprise. These kind of stories, I think, help a lot more. They feel that there's a connection to you. That's why they want you to succeed, and they will put in a lot more than money to help you succeed. So I think it's really about trying to figure that out. And as for like the track record, again, I think we've been seeing a lot more funders, especially the really private ones. They are willing to take risks. So they could just be like, oh, I like your idea, it's fun, I'll fund it. They are a bit harder to find, which is why I think we keep repeating about the networking and the leverage. So you might be like 3 degrees of separation from that person, but through Kenny, and then Kenny knows somebody else, and then somebody else knows somebody else, and that's how you kind of get into these like mysterious pools of people. Like, if that helps.
No, I think just an additional point there is that the staying power is important. What happened is sometimes an NGO says a lot of good things about what they want to do, and then afterwards the funder say, okay, we will provide support for you to get a scholarship to go to this or that school for an NGO training program. After 3 months, that person decides to go back to the private sector or do something totally different. So the funder sometimes there's an element of a wariness. They call it the tourists in the NGO space. They say they want to be in it. Then after 3 to 6 months, they discover about themselves. They realize that maybe it's not for me as well. So I would say that the staying power, as long as the person stays there long enough, it's not just like a passing interest to learn about the space and afterwards maybe move out from the space. That's number one. Number two, in terms of the faith question, many organizations want to say, I want to scale my work from 10 schools to 50 schools to 100 schools, what have you. But I think people will, and there are a lot of asks, similar asks, whether schools, children, whether animals, whether number of trees planted, so on and so forth. The issue there is, I think part of it is positioning. What are you trying to achieve? And before you even scale, what is the minimum impact that you are trying to generate? And maybe how to demonstrate it in a much smaller scale first. And what is your definition of impact by doing that from a small scale perspective? And then look at the funders who is relevant to what you're doing and who's interested in supporting you. Once you're able to define that and your funder is happy and you're able to communicate your success, then you go to bigger funders who say, okay, wow, this works, and you're able to pilot this over, and you can speak with a bigger funder because it's clear what you're trying to do, and the smaller idea is able to be scaled up.
I can just answer that. I think what we see is slightly different with crowdfunding is that of our social enterprises, the majority are product-based businesses, and the people producing the products are in an environment where you know, it's funny because I didn't know a lot about fair trade before I came into this, right? And really, fair trade is a concept of crowdfunding. You pay in advance, right? In terms of if you're having someone do work for you, I mean, that's what crowdfunding is. They're paying you in advance for that product, and so it's all like a nice circle. And so we've seen that the people that have used crowdfunding, it's because they're also trying to, I think, they're trying to build a business in terms of product development and you know, having their business grow. But there is the positive aspect of particularly who they're supporting through that product development, because it's typically, you know, maybe you know, these women in India kind of reviving a lost art, but it gives them a way to work at home. And particularly when you look across Southeast Asia, a lot of women are working from home as a supplemental income in terms of, you know, trying to support their families as well as do what they need to do to support the family, just day-to-day non-paid work, right? So I think that's where the crowdfunding we look at, it's a little bit of, they're looking to build a bit of awareness, get the product out there, find their consumer, find their target market. That's what we've seen, I think, from more the social enterprise we've worked out, which I think is a little bit different. That would, I think, would define a little bit more what we've seen. And I think that's because they've got that kind of approach coming in. So they are trying to build an income, a business that gives them an income, which is what we should all be, a sustainable business. We don't have to be the Ubers and the Airbnbs and the unicorns of the world. I mean, the reality is that most businesses don't take in funding. You know, around 90% of businesses just reinvest. And I think historically did family, friends, fools, which I think is what crowdfunding is slightly replacing, because, you know, it's hard, right? Whether you term yourself social enterprise, it's hard for everyone. So I think that's what we're seeing in terms of people trying to use funding, is to try and just keep moving themselves forward, grow a bit better, get more products, kind of give the people they're working with a voice, which is wonderful.
Okay, could I ask the three of you to leave us with one sentence each? One thing that you want everybody to remember from today. Or word.
Well, I always say this. Just do it. Whatever you want to do, just have a try. That's. I know it seems really simple and Nike, but I do believe in that. You know, action is the best way to just see if something's going to work for you, and don't hesitate.
I would say, well, this is sort of a personal mantra for me, is to envision success first, right? Visualize that and then work backwards. If you kind of get stuck in the how-tos and I don't have enough funding, or, you know, the problems, then you might get yourself into a rut in your mind, and actually it might just be in your mind. So if you can imagine that and you can have that vision in your mind, then you can sell it to people around you, to volunteers, to part-time people, to funders, and have them get caught up in your dream.
And don't treat you like an ATM.
Yeah. No cards. Don't stick your cards in. Sorry.
Know yourself really well. Know the social issues, the context of what you're trying to achieve really, really well. As I said, the onion skin. And the third one is understand the why of why you're doing this, because this is really, really hard work. And if it's a social enterprise, make sure it's a business model. If it's really scaling the impact, funding from private investors is not necessarily the way to go, but find other ways, but don't get misguided by the funding, by the funders' needs, and really focus on what you're trying to achieve and take it forward from there. Maybe philanthropy would be the best approach for the latter part.
Thank you very much, and thank you all. We'll be here. If you have any questions that you want to ask on an individual basis, we'll stay around for you. Thank you.